Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be introducing you to the Raspberry Pi. So first of all, what exactly is a Raspberry Pi? A Raspberry Pi is a small computer. They are designed and developed in the UK by the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So this is what it looks like. It is a single board computer, which means that all the components including a processor, a memory and various ports lie on one single board. Raspberry Pi is a very tiny computer. It comes in this small box, but it is powerful enough to be used like you would use any normal computer. The Raspberry Pi is primarily used for educational purposes such as computer programming and electronics. It was created with the idea of creating a low-cost computer that can be afforded by many people, including those in developing countries. In addition, it is small size makes it portable, so because of that, it can be easily used in several electronics and robotics projects. Now, let me show you the different components of a Raspberry Pi. What I have is a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. So this is the 4th generation of a Raspberry Pi. So here's the processor. Right next to that is the RAM. So the model that I have comes with 4 GB of RAM. There are other variants of Raspberry Pi that come with 2 GB and 8 GB of RAM as well. Next to that is a USB controller. Right now you can't see all of these very clearly because I have attached heat sinks on top of each one of them. So here's the Raspberry Pi logo, which is that of a raspberry, and you will find this printed on the computer as well as on the board, on the box. So starting with the top left, this is a wireless and Bluetooth controller. Down here, the Raspberry Pi gets its power through this port. This is a normal USB Type-C port that you will find in most current day mobile phones. Next, there are two different HDMI ports. So if you have two different HDMI displays, you can connect both of them. But if you have only one display, please be sure to connect it to the first of these two ports. Next, there is an audio jack, so you can either connect external speakers or headphones here. Next, there are 4 different USB ports to connect different devices to the computer. So these contain both USB type 2.0 and USB 3.0 ports. Next is an Ethernet port where you can connect your LAN. Over here, there are GPIO. These are GPIO pins. There are a total of GPIO stands for general purpose input output. So here there are a total of 40 GPIO pins. These can be used to connect various electronic components. I will be covering more about what you can do with these ports in later videos. And lastly, you might have noticed that there is no hard disk on the Raspberry Pi. So instead, this micro SD card acts as a hard disk, and this goes in the back of the Raspberry Pi here. The Raspberry Pi requires the capacity of the card to at least be 4 GB. In my case, I am using a 32 GB card. What I have explained so far are the components that are on the Raspberry Pi board. In addition, to use the Raspberry Pi, you will typically need a few other accessories that need to be bought separately. So some of them will include a power supply, which, as I said, goes into the power supply port. You might also want a case to put the Raspberry Pi in. So this is how the official Raspberry Pi case looks, and the Raspberry Pi goes in here. As I explained, you will most definitely need a micro SD card. That's where the operating system and all the data resides. In addition, you will also need a HDMI cable to connect to a monitor. So if you don't have one already, you need to buy that as well. Now, let me switch on the Raspberry Pi, connect it to an external monitor and show you what its UI looks like.
Before we can start using the Raspberry Pi, we first need to load an operating system on the SD card. And so to do that, Raspberry Pi has provided a free app called Raspberry Pi Imager, and this is a very easy to use app. And so all you need to do is choose the SD card on which you want to load the operating system, and you need to choose the operating system to load on the SD card. So by default, the software recommends a basic version of Raspberry Pi, Raspberry Pi OS, also commonly known as Raspbian, that has a command line and UI as well as some basic utilities. There are also other versions of Raspbian, one that's lightweight, which does not have any much UI, it only has a command line, and there's also a fully loaded version of Raspbian that also contains a command line and good UI and various other applications. And there are various other operating systems that can also be installed, such as LibreELEC, Ubuntu, and there are various others that can be installed. So you just have to select the operating system which you want to load and choose the SD card, and then when you click on write, it will load the operating system onto your SD card.
The first time you switch on your Raspberry Pi, you'll have to physically connect a USB mouse and keyboard as well as an external monitor. And after you do that, the first time setup wizard will appear, where you can choose your basic settings such as region, Wi-Fi settings, and various other basic settings to get you up and running. So after that, to avoid connecting a physical mouse, external mouse, keyboard and monitor each time I want to use the Raspberry Pi, I'll need to enable remote desktop connection. And in order to do that, you need to launch the terminal on the Raspberry Pi and enter the command sudo raspi-config. And once you do that, it will take you to this window. And over here, in order to enable VNC server, you will have to go down to interfacing options, and there's an option that says VNC, and here you will have to select yes, and then it will give you a message saying the VNC server is enabled. And then by installing the VNC viewer app on any of your devices, you can connect to the Raspberry Pi. So now you'll be able to connect to the Raspberry Pi through any computer in the network. The first screen that appears after the Raspberry Pi setup is the desktop screen, and this looks pretty much like any other computer's desktop would look. So this is how the UI of Raspbian looks. Raspbian is a variant of Debian Linux, which is a popular distribution of Linux. It is frequently updated with new features by Debian as well as the Raspberry Pi community. So in order to launch apps, all you have to do is go to the top left and click on the Raspberry Pi logo here, and this brings a drop-down list of all the apps that are installed. And some of the apps that are installed by default are Python IDE, and there are also office tools such as LibreOffice Calc and Writer, and even a web browser called Chromium web browser is included, and there are also various accessories such as calculator, file manager, PDF viewer, and a text editor. In order to install additional software on your Raspberry Pi, you will again have to go ahead and click on the Raspberry Pi logo, and down at the bottom under preferences you will see add and remove software. So just click on that, and this will bring up this little window, and from here you can add various accessories and games. So if you want to add an app, so this will take some time to load. If you want to add an app, so there are various games that are available such as Ancient Warfare,
maths puzzle games and chess games. So in order to install an app, you just have to select it and click on apply, and then it will install the software on your computer. You can also install various programming software, and this will also take some time to load. So you can install programming languages such as programming language software such as Python. You can also install C or C++, and you can install basically any programming language that's supported by the Raspberry Pi. Talking about support of programming languages, there are many programming languages that can be supported by Raspberry Pi. So what I have installed on my Pi is Thorny is a Python IDE that is called Thorny, that's installed by default on the Raspberry Pi, and this is what it looks like. You can write your code here and execute it just like any normal programming language software would look. Apart from Python, there are also various other languages that can be read by the Raspberry Pi, such as Java and JavaScript as well. So any programming language can be used to control the GPIO pins on the extension board and do various stuff with it, do various things with it. Speaking of controlling the GPIO pins using the programming language software, I will definitely be getting into all of this in later videos. Now that you have set up your Raspberry Pi, let me show you how to make the most of it. The ideal place to start would be the Raspberry Pi's website. Here there's a wealth of information about how you can use the Raspberry Pi and various projects you can make using it. So here under education there are a few lessons on how to use the Raspberry Pi. So simple hello world programs, etc. So these are basic steps on how you can get started with the Raspberry Pi. There's also some cool stuff you can do with the Raspberry Pi. So if you click on projects, that will come up. So these include both projects for beginners as well as advanced users. So let me show you some of them. For beginners, there are certain simple projects that don't require much programming knowledge, such as this LAMP server, the web server that you can build, and you can make simple web pages and web pages using that. If you are more interested in programming, then they have projects such as this one where you can program it using Python. This is a simple project that you can program using Python, and if you want to do more advanced programming, then there's something like there's this advanced example such as flight data analysis. If you're more into electronics and robotics, then there are a lot of options that are mentioned here. Some simple ones are Scratch. So you can build simple circuits and program them using Scratch, as shown here. The more advanced options would be like this one, robot. You can control robot antennas. There's more and more advanced stuff here that you can explore at your own place. So as you can see, there are many various options here for advanced electronic projects, such as a laser tripwire or a line following robot that you can program with Python or other programming languages. Hope this has given you a good idea of what and all is possible using the Raspberry Pi.
In this video, I have explained to you what a Raspberry Pi is. I have also shown you its hardware and software interfaces. Hope this video was useful for you to learn about the Raspberry Pi. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button down below. Share this video and don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on my future videos. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more videos.